Okay, looks like we're good.
Yep. So Nancy, if you want to explain to anyone who needs Spanish translation on how they can get into that room.
Sure. Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos. Si desea escuchar la interpretación de esta reunión, de esta sesión en español, pueden oprimir el globo que aparece en la parte baja de su pantalla y seleccionar el idioma español o Spanish. También, después de eso, oprima la sesión o la sección que dice Mute audio original. Si está usando un teléfono celular, oprima los 3 puntos que aparecen en su pantalla y seleccione el idioma español, Spanish. Y también oprima en la sección que dice Mute audio original. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Kleppen. I'm the Planning and Zoning Director for the city. As you obviously know, we are in the process of updating the city's zoning regulations, which haven't been updated in nearly 30 years. So it was high time that we undertook that process. We started a process, actually, should say last Friday, where we had some kickoff meetings to kind of introduce the charrette that's happening now. And what we're doing this week is a series of specific topic related matters that impact the regulations, and wanted to get feedback from the public. And we have relevant city staff that deals with this particular segment of the regulations with us today. I'm going to try to flag everybody, and then I'll turn it over to our consultant team. We have Jim Travers and Garrett Palella from Transportation, Mobility, and Parking. We also have, I think Chief Kowalik is on, Michelle DeLuca from Emergency Management. And who am I missing? Am I missing anybody? No, I thought Vanessa is there. She's waving frantically from Department of Public Works. So she is on with us. Thank you, Vanessa. And with that, I will turn it over to Jessica and Brian from TPUDC.
In a minute. So
can we get everybody to mute themselves? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Brian Wright. I'm the principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative here with Jessica Wilson. And we are part of the consultant team working on the new zoning update. We are embarking upon the first day of the charrette process. So it's a multi-day event that we'll be having a series of these technical meetings with different topics. We'll be working real time. We'll be, there's opportunities for people to drop in on an open studio Zoom line as well if they have to miss a meeting. So, never fear if you're not able to make it to everything. We know that people's lives are very busy. So thank you for sharing some of your time with us today. The format of this meeting is pretty freeform. Actually, it's more of a discussion. We are in the information gathering mode. We're trying to learn from the community since we aren't from there. And for us, these conversations are, really helpful because you all know this place better than we ever can. Some of the things that are discussed during these meetings are, somewhat technical, which is great that we have different people representing different departments in the city here. As questions come up, or we're looking for guidance and insights in this department. And but others of you are, good citizens who are interested in what's going on in the city. But everybody has an equal voice at this discussion, so feel free to chime in at any time. You don't have to be an expert on anything to participate. So this meeting is intended to talk about connectivity, streets, and we'll also be talking about maybe multimodal transportation, walkability, sidewalks, biking, parking, all of those things that make allow people to move around the city. So, from our work all around the country, we get to see all sorts of things, different types of places. Some places we work they're very suburban, and so they have, overly wide roads and all sorts of things that make it very easy to provide, emergency services, for instance, and for cars to move quickly and all of that. But unfortunately, for those places that are like that, they make it really difficult for people to move around if they're not in a car. So they're not very walkable or bikeable. And so as we move forward throughout history, there is, as people have become more and more reliant on their cars, there's been more of a tendency to take even wonderful historical places like Norwalk and start to apply some of these suburban concepts and design strategies when it comes to transportation, moving cars around, et cetera. And so one of the things that we try to do is understand, from a community perspective, what's important, how things are working, where you're struggling, looking also at the citywide plan for guidance, and it talks all about walkability, bikeability, connectivity. And so we're really taking that as a given. Those are our instructions and working orders, because the zoning ordinance is really just the implementation of that vision that's in the citywide plan. So just want to pause there and open it up to all of you to chime in. If you want to raise your hand, if you've got something to say, if you click on the little reactions button at the bottom of your screen, there'll be a raise hand icon, and we'll just start calling on people as we see them on the screen. So who wants to share something with us first? What do we need to know about connectivity and streets and moving around? Sounds like things are going well there. That's a good sign. Lots of places we go, every person on the screen would have raised their hand immediately and told us all of the woes that how much terrible traffic they have, or so unsafe and accidents, et cetera. So looks like Jim had his hand up first. Go ahead, Jim. Unmute yourself. Oh, and if anybody wants to turn on their video camera, we'd love to see your faces. If you're okay, I'll be good to see you, but you don't have to. Go ahead, Jim.
Hi. I think, I applaud the city for taking on. I think updating this is really important. I think that, managing all modes of transportation, I think, is critical as we look to move this forward. When we weigh one against the other, we don't win in all modes. I think that there are a tremendous amount of opportunities for us, and many of our roads, are built to accommodate rush hour traffic, which is always challenging because it's needed for a certain period of time. But I think just challenging us to take a look at those and how it's managed even in those off hours, but also how we provide some level of equity in a cyclist infrastructure, but really in a walkability infrastructure, right? We have one of the lowest walk scores that we have going. And it's largely, it has to do with, we don't have the infrastructure, and the infrastructure that we have, wasn't really designed into really what we see now, what we know now to be the better ways to provide a level of barrier between the pedestrian and the vehicular traffic. The introduction of street trees as it plays to vital components of what we do, but also how we feel in the streets. So we have it always amazes me in the short time that I've been here, and I've said this story probably countless times, but in City Hall, there's a track that goes around a field, and there are people walking that track day and night, every single day, rainy weather. And, we've approached a number of the people who use that and asking them, why did they use it? And they use it because they don't have sidewalks around their house, right? And they're looking for exercise. They're looking to get out. But we know all those benefits from exercising, just getting out is important for people age at home, but it's also important to connect us to community, connect us to one another. And they're getting in their car and they're becoming the traffic that we do not like, or we hear that we don't like. just so that they can walk around in a circle and not really connect. So really finding the way that we can have infrastructure that connects people to community, connects people to one another, gives them the opportunity to age at home, I think is a vital component of how we look to move forward. Because if we don't have infrastructure that gets people from point A to point B, otherwise just getting in a car, that we'll never be anywhere where we are today. But you should be able to walk to your corner store, right? You should be able to take your dog for a walk. That doesn't have to go to a dog park, right? And it is the intrinsic part of how we connect with our neighbors. So I think that is, identifying those and putting best practices into the modes that we know people respond to, I think is a huge win for growing the city in exponentially in connecting us to other. I think it also becomes safer cities, right? So preaching to the choir, I think, on a number of those issues, but I don't think we can spend enough in investment on making Norwalk more walkable.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm glad. I always like it when people say things that I typically say before I say them, so that it is more of an organic process. But the idea of people being able to age in place, and I think there's a statistic that says you can walk about 20 years longer than you ought to be or can be driving. And so, having people have that freedom of mobility for much longer by having a more walkable city. As an outsider, one observation that I'll share with you all is, we work all over the country, so we get to see lots of places, and some of them are beautiful and some of them are not. Some of them call us because they need our help desperately to become a place where people actually want to live. You all are located in a geographic spot that makes people want to be there. You have this historic city that has a lot of great character to it. And so, the way I think about it is you have a beautiful city, but you have a lot of really ugly streets. And what I mean by that is you all have been overrun by all of the overhead lines. You have like 3 streets with street trees, it looks like, from my count. I mean, I'm just joking around. We roamed around and saw a few. We didn't see every street, I guess is my point, but enough that were completely devoid of vegetation for me to take note of it. And I think you have several things working against you, making that happen. The first thing is because of the age of your city, it's historic. The streets are wonderful and narrow in most cases, or they were. In some of the cases where you widen streets over the days where have been focused on moving cars more efficiently, you have taken out the opportunity for enough space for street trees. But probably the biggest issue really are the overhead lines, because even if you could plant something underneath them, you end up with some small shrubby ornamental trees that doesn't provide the functionality what a street tree should. It doesn't give you the, besides a little bit of green, it doesn't give you the overall visual aesthetic. It doesn't provide shade to people. It doesn't provide the pedestrian a feeling of separation from the, vehicular traffic on the street, et cetera. And so I think that, just as a side note, this is more of a citywide plan, comprehensive plan kind of a comment, but an encouragement to echo what it probably says in the comp plan is for you guys to do everything that you can do to move. I don't even say move the lines. That seems to be the problem, but whatever it takes to get proper street trees on at least some of your most important streets will have a huge impact, not only in the image of the city, but also environmentally, et cetera. So that just, I was blown away by some of those streets. But the fact that you all have, multiple train stations is incredible. I saw lots of bus stops around. I don't know how your routes work thus far, but it seems like you have all the parts and pieces in place that many of the cities that we work in are wishing they had one of. And so I'm encouraged by that. But whatever we can do through the zoning process to make streets more lovely, to make them, walkability isn't just about providing the infrastructure, be it sidewalks or bikeability, isn't just about providing bike lanes. It's about making a place where people want to walk because it's a great experience. And so it sounds like you're already on top of that, but I just want to encourage you as an outsider to be very aggressive in that. So Tanner, saw your hand up next. Go ahead.
Thanks. Really excited to be here. By way of introduction, my name is Tanner Thompson. I'm the chair of the Bike Walk Commission. It's an advisory committee that's composed of volunteers, but advises the city government on issues of biking and walking. So in that capacity, I'm very excited to be here. I want to talk about walkability, and in particular, among other things, I see two elements as very important to walkability. One is the density of amenities around where people might walk. You know, the more things that people have access to within walking distance, the likelier they'll be to walk. The other one is the attractiveness of the environment. And there are a lot of things that I would like to bring up that I think would add to these two factors. Not all of them are an issue of zoning, but there's one that I'm very confident is an issue of zoning, and that is around parking and parking minimums in particular. The more that I kind of have pulled on the thread of city design and urbanism, the more I realize that how detrimental the like large parking lots are to the walkability of a town, and even smaller parking lots. Not only do surface parking lots make buildings farther apart, making it harder to walk there because the area just becomes less dense. It also incentivizes more people to drive, right? When there's convenient free parking, that is nice if you're in a car, but it also it incentivizes more people to get in their cars and drive somewhere when maybe they could in fact walk. If somebody lives a 10-minute walk away, but the walk is unattractive and the driving is attractive, they will drive. Whereas if the driving is unattractive and the walking is attractive, they will walk. So as with that said, I would encourage in this rewrite to eliminate as many requirements to build a certain amount of parking, otherwise known as parking minimums, as possible, in particular in our urban cores, in South Norwalk, in the Wall Street area. I live on Golden Hill, which is a quick walk to South Norwalk, but unfortunately, on my way from my house to South Norwalk, which is maybe a 10-minute walk, and when I say South Norwalk, I mean Washington Street in particular, where all the restaurants are, I have to cross Martin Luther King, which is essentially an urban highway, and then I have to cross the Webster lot, which is a huge parking lot. And as a result, I don't do that walk near as much as I would like to, because half of the walk is completely unattractive because it's just asphalt. And I'm interacting with cars. I'm having to wait on car traffic. I'm having to dodge car traffic in the parking lot. So both by way of personal anecdote and by way of systemic change, I would love to see parking minimums done away with. Now I'll address quickly the difference. You know, I am not proposing that we do away with parking lots entirely, as that's the parking minimum just refers to the amount of parking that's legally required to be built. I think that those requirements, and studies show this, require much more parking than is actually necessary, and certainly more parking than the market often demands. I think that as a first step to combating the surface parking lots and what they do to walkability, I think that we should not require developers to build more parking than they deem necessary. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. That's a great point. And what we always explain to communities we're working in is, there's this idea that the city is going to save itself from developers who aren't going to put enough parking around. And it's funny because, we work also for private developers in part of our practice, and our clients are much more concerned about providing exactly the right number of parking spaces, far beyond what the city, would care about. Not more spaces, but they care more about getting it right, because they know if they don't do it correctly, they will, one, make it where the customers don't want to come, or two, waste land if they provide more parking than they need. The issue is to, when you think about your historic areas, and I always talk about the inherent flexibility in any historic downtown area or historic neighborhoods, the buildings have been so many different things over the years. They just change, and one business goes out, one comes in. If it fits for their space, and so be it. But the businesses or the uses that come in work with what they're given, right? And so if there's not enough parking for a particular future user, then that user goes somewhere else, and so be it. But because you all have multimodal transportation infrastructure in place, you can be much more aggressive in how you deal with parking. In a suburban area where you don't have any way to get around the city except for a car, and you start saying, well, we're gonna, not let, parking lots, we're not gonna have parking lots anymore, we're not gonna have parking standards or whatever, then now you find yourself in a situation where maybe it'll get bad enough, that you might get some transit options because of the problem that you caused yourself. But for you all, you have the infrastructure in place that can allow people to get around. To your point about the impact of surface parking lots that are sort of visible and out on the front of as you walk down the street, the studies have shown that if you have a gap of about more than about 30 feet in a streetscape, pedestrians lose interest and tend to kind of not continue on down the street in that direction. And so looking at the cost of allowing parking, you think, well, we're going to allow this building to go down and we replace the parking, and then that'll have a benefit to the surrounding area, and it tends not to. Not only that, they often tend to be private parking lots, and then so whenever you have parking, you certainly want to make it shared parking, et cetera. But I think that letting the developer, the market, really start to focus on what's the right amount of parking. In many cities that we work in that are more urban, they say, we're not going to have any parking standards at all. Instead of a parking minimum, you have a parking maximum. So you don't allow any more than a certain amount of parking. It's sort of a statement of who you are as a community. We're supporting walking and biking rather than driving. I remember when we were working on the zoning ordinance in Burlington, Vermont. We were also working on planning, and they were trying to figure out ways to develop their waterfront around Lake Champlain. And we said, okay, well, you're going to have new development down there. It's going to be great. Everybody's going to want to go there. You'll probably need a parking structure to meet the parking demand that will be created. And they said, you remember when we told you that we're all about walking and biking, and if we put a parking garage and we're actually encouraging people to drive, we're making it easier, and that's not who we are as a community. So we want all the things that we've talked about having at the water, but people are going to walk and bike or take a bus, etc. And so they're really committed, even if it costs some inconvenience to them. So I think next was Audrey, is that right?
Yep.
Yes, hi.
It looks like.
Okay, great. So my top left is next. Great. So go ahead, Audrey.
Hi, Audrey Kozarin, affiliated for a few years with biking and walking and nature, environmental issues in our city. Thank you so much for taking this on, and thanks to Steve and everybody in zoning and planning. So the issue of connectivity is really important. We do have the Norwalk River Valley Trail, which now has an off-road component running through Norwalk, under construction now. And I think it's important to bring all the neighboring neighborhoods to this main artery, so that, for instance, we had friends in from out of town, and we took them out on the Sheffield Island ferry out to the island, the Lighthouse Island, on Saturday. My husband and I could have ridden our bikes easily down our hill, down to Sono, except we feel like we're in danger of our lives because there's no safe, the traffic's crazy and it feels very unsafe. But it would have been one less car down there trying to find a place to park. Ironically, when we got off the boat, there was two pedestrians had been hit by a car by Donovan's there in Sono. So our friends got to see that, which wasn't too pleasant. So connectivity is really key. It may involve some level of perspective of remaking or remodeling our city to some extent. I'm familiar with LaGrange, Georgia. They have the Thread, which is an off-road, 12-foot wide, brand new bike walk trail, completely safe. It runs through residential, commercial, city and state properties, parks. So between easements, and I'm sure there was a lot of zoning and a lot of arrangements that needed to be made, but it's 29 miles off-road for walking and biking, and all the neighboring neighborhoods come in, feed into it. So like our NRVT, we've got a skeleton starting here where all the neighboring neighborhoods can connect to it. And that feeds into our harbor loop trail along the Norwalk River. And that is a beautiful connection for our town green, Mill Hill, and down to the harbor loop and Wall Street, that whole historic area. So we've got the beginnings of some things where we've got many possibilities. And I look forward to all of these things coming together little by little. It may involve some shifts in perspective, people getting on their bikes as we make things safer and leaving the car behind. So I'll leave it at that. And thanks again for being here for this.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate your time. Heather.
Hi, I am the president of the Silver Mine Neighbor Association. So I'm going to speak specifically to Silver Mine, which is the northernmost area, I guess. Our biggest concern, I think right now, there's actually a pedestrian traffic study going on, and I'd like to hear how that's being incorporated. I know it's going on simultaneously with this, so I don't know which is going to take precedence or how they're going to collaborate, but that's one of the things that we find really difficult in Norwalk, is that things seem to be very siloed. When we have issues, especially up in Silver Mine, and we're concerned about safety because it's very walkable and bikeable in Silver Mine, but you know, as far as speeding and blind spots and stuff like that, there are concerns. We've had great collaboration with the police department and some of the other departments, but they don't always work together, especially when it comes to zoning specific areas. So I'd love to hear from you guys how that's going to be collaborated. Maybe that's a Steve Kleppen thing. Secondly, specifically about zoning, because that's what you're doing. We have concerns in our neighborhood about peer reviews that are being done as far as traffic. A lot of times it's the same person and doesn't seem to really take in a large enough area of where the traffic is, considering that we have 95, Route 123, Main Avenue, and Super 7 Merritt Parkway. Where we are, a lot of that feeds into each other, and if you get a traffic study in a very specific area, the scope is not large enough. And one of the other things that I'd love to see happen, or our neighborhood would love to see happen, is the traffic studies, when they're done, they seem to be, I don't know what the word is, not accurate, but when the developer is paying for the study, usually almost all the time it says, you know, no impact. There's no impact, especially where we see on Glover Avenue, there's a lot of development being done without a lot around there. There's not a grocery store that's walkable without walking under the Merritt Parkway Bridge, which is not safe at the moment. There's no CVS is close. You could kind of walk, but there's no way to walk there. So having traffic studies about what is actually realistic and not based on what that little spot or area that a developer wants to develop. So I'd love to see how we could change the traffic study system in our city. And so me as a person, individual, and a Norwalk resident, one of the things that I'd love to see is the connectivity. We have a great parking garage down in Wall Street area, but you can't really get there to the library, which is a big family walking thing with a lot of people with strollers and things like that. You can't really park there and walk across the street. So I'd love to see something done there. I don't know if that's a DPW thing or a zoning thing. So that's it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Steve, can you talk a little bit about the traffic impact study, sort of what the process is and all of that?
Yeah, so I'll probably ask Jim or Garrett to kind of jump in on that. So that's a separate, I think you're referring to the transportation master plan, I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I just wanted to know how they're being coordinated, because since they're going on at the same time, how are you integrating them together, or how are you collaborating, both of those studies together?
Yeah, so there are two distinct studies, I guess, from in processes, but my staff, either myself or Brian, who's also on the call, also participates in the transportation master plan process in terms of the meetings and what's going on. And obviously, Jim and his team are involved with this process here today. And we have, thanks to Garrett, we set up, I can't remember for monthly or bi-monthly meetings we have set up where we go over different projects and things that are going on. So we're both pretty well aware of what the other group is up to in doing. And I think from a collaborative standpoint, looking at the, sometimes we get focused on certain things with the planning side, but then having Jim and Garrett and the rest of their team having input on some of the different things like we've been talking a lot about, and Jim's been pushing street trees a lot, which Brian also talked about, which has been, something that, to be honest with you, wasn't the first thing that always come to my mind, but I think, putting those things into the formula is important. Talking about specifically, you mentioned the traffic study. So, and without going into too much of the weeds, for Glover Avenue area, there's obviously a very large proposal that's in front of the zoning commission now. We did ask them, they've done actually 3 traffic studies now in relation to that. So the first one they put together, we had an outside consultant do peer review, met with them and said, you really need to take a bigger picture look at this, because obviously you have, as you mentioned, you have the Merritt Parkway, you have Main Ave, you have the connector, and the DOT has numerous projects planned for that area. So we asked them to reevaluate their entire proposal based on the infrastructure improvements that DOT has proposed to date. And so we're factoring that into our decision-making and how we look at the proposal and if and how we can approve it based on the existing confines. Because we know, I commute through there, so I know firsthand how bad that can be at certain times of day. Pre-COVID, post-COVID, it's still at certain times of day is bad. So we're very cognizant of not having things that exacerbate those problems. So we're trying to work with them on long-term solutions to that area. I don't know if Jim, if you want to chime in any more about the master plan part of it.
Jim, I'm sorry. Just one more thing. I guess my question is, I know there's impact and we have development. We're not anti-development or anything, but when you don't have a realistic sense of what the impact's going to be, I know with Glover they said there were going to be like 7 car trips a week, and given even if somebody's not going to work in their car from Glover, there's not in that unit. More than 7 people are going to be going to the grocery store in a week. So it doesn't help us plan for the best system going forward when we don't have a realistic expectations about what we need to look at and plan for. Okay.
So I'll speak to just briefly, and Garrett, you can certainly jump in if you want. So in addition to the outside agency traffic impact analysis that takes place, we also now take a very close look and a detailed look and provide our own detailed response to that as well. Looking for a lot of the information that we see is the most current with the best practices, but we're also looking at what are those opportunities and ways to mitigate traffic. We look at it holistically, not just from a vehicular movement perspective, but how can, because as I said earlier, we can always talk about traffic, right? But if we only build for traffic, that's all we can ever do, right? So we want to make sure that we provide opportunities so that people can walk to the nearest grocery store, so they can walk to CVS, so they have opportunities to do those movements outside getting in a car. So we look, we just did very comprehensive reviews for Stu Leonard's, right? And you're looking at each of those. So all I can tell you is going forward, I can't talk about what happened in the past. Going forward, we're going to take a comprehensive review and happily show you any of the documentation that we put forth. But we look very heavily at those and making sure that that there's an equity in the network and that those numbers are really numbers that work, right? So we'll, and I think Steve hit it in before, we meet on a regular basis, right? We're just up and down the halls from one another. So, Steve will be in my office, I'll be in Steve's office. We look at, while we have monthly meetings that we have set up to formally sit down and go, that doesn't preclude us from just hopping in each other's office and picking up the phone. And then, we'll continue to do that to make sure that we have the best practice.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in as well. And I think Jim touched upon it a little bit about the infrastructure and it just not being there. So I do think it's really important that we do have some updated traffic study guidelines, which encourage the market or developers to look at not just how they can mitigate vehicular traffic, because if we want to lessen the load and decrease vehicular traffic, we have to provide alternative modes and means. So just making sure that new sites are really integrated with public transit, making sure that they provide bicycle amenities. We're just starting to build out a bike network here, but we really don't have a lot of bike infrastructure, places to park your bicycles, to store them, whether it's for short or long term. Jim touched a little bit upon like the connectivity. So making sure that at every intersection that there's a crossing for pedestrians and that it's easy for them to get around. So looking at those guidelines, and we touched upon a couple other things, but also I just like to throw in that having some type of for the market or developers transportation management plan. I think it's really important that we just don't do a good enough job getting all the information that's out there and all the different resources that are available. So to look at employers having some type of policy in place to help manage and help coordinate public transit, or to provide information about different programs in the area. Like we have some great programs in Norwalk, Wheels to You stands out, so that people can be less car dependent and they can go to the office and there can be some on-demand transportation to get them to and from other destinations that's already on the road, instead of them having to bring a vehicle and contribute. And they can also, employers can look at different preferential parking strategies, and also start to look at some other incentives. So that was just another idea that we had as well that could be incorporated.
Great. Well, one of the things too, we've been hearing from many people throughout the city that there is a desire to provide some additional housing options, lower cost options. So increasing the prevalence of accessory dwelling units, or allowing people to, add additional units within their home, and just trying to solve some of your housing challenges you have with affordability, which is, at the end of the day, a supply and demand issue. And so in a place like Norwalk, except for obviously in a more a downtown area, of which your land area is quite limited to, the historic core. Look at, sort of the areas where you think about density in this grand scheme of the entire city, it's quite small compared to how many areas are built out with detached single family residential exclusive homes. And so the in situations like that, and we have, as I said, we've been hearing that people are interested in that. Even people who live in the neighborhood saying, I'd like to be able to have our neighborhood to start to densify some, which is normally we hear, yes, we'd like to have some more affordable options, more workforce housing, some housing for seniors to downsize into, et cetera, as long as it's not in my neighborhood. And so we haven't been hearing that in Norwalk. And so in those situations, when we have a desire for existing, stable, lovely, historic, in a lot of cases, single family neighborhoods, that when there's a desire to start to densify them some, we look for what we refer to as like soft density that isn't noticeable, so that it still has the same character. It still feels like the same neighborhood at the end of the day, even if every single lot had accessory dwelling unit. But to Heather's point, if you took, an area like Silvermine, and I don't know how many houses are there, but let's just say if every one of those houses built an accessory dwelling unit, now you've added at least one more car, probably, and maybe not. Maybe your transportation system is good enough to have it where people don't have to, even at the sort of the more fringe neighborhoods. And maybe as a part of a commitment to providing more reasonably priced housing options and doing things like accessory dwelling units, you say, well, we know that we can't just add that without adding infrastructure to support it. So we're going to now increase our transit option in those areas as well to make it where people actually don't have to have a car. And so I know that you already allow accessory dwelling units in some circumstances, and but our current understanding is that it's not as simple as just, oh yeah, I'd like to do that and let me put it back there. And so we're learning more about that right now. And that's just one way that people can, add some soft density to an established neighborhood. But my point is, though, we can't just assume that there's no impact. And so we want to, really think about ways to mitigate any impacts there are. But if you're a community that's committed to transit, maybe every traffic study coming back for every new development saying that it actually does reduce the flow of vehicles, you say, oh, good, that's heading towards our goal, because that's going to make us invest more in transit, et cetera. It's just a community wide consideration to think about that. So I see Tom is in my upper left, but his hand is raised.
It's raised.
Oh, there it is. Oh, sorry, it's just blending in right there. There you go. So, okay, Tom, go ahead.
Thank you. Tom Livingston, a member of the Common Council. I don't want to repeat a lot of what's been said before because it just, I think we're all in strong support of connectivity. I just want to say a couple of things in terms of walkability and including within that bikeability. I view it as really a competitive issue in a sense that, walkability leads to livability, leads to desirability, and gets people to come to the city. We've heard that in other actions taken. And I think the connectivity and walkability needs to be built into every zoning decision that's made. I mean, we need to look at how every project will affect the ability of citizens to get around town by foot or by bike or whatever, or by bus. I just think it needs to be part of every decision, as I said. Just a couple things I want to point to specifically. I just want to bring your attention to, you may not know about, but it keys off something said earlier. There are some, part of my district is Rowayton, and there are some trails that have been sort of in the, I won't say in the deeds, there's sort of maybe paper roads or other historic alleyways or whatever that have been used for years by residents to get from point A to point B. And I think we should incentivize those any way we can in the zoning regs. I don't think enough people know about them. I think that we should encourage them. And if there are ways of in new developments to put them in, I think we should look at that. Is interesting. A side note, I was just up in Martha's Vineyard, and I know that they have funds set aside to purchase that type of thing. And I think that may be a stretch for us, but I think it's something we could look at. The other thing I wanted to look at was Wall Street. And as I'm sure you guys know, that's kind of a very much of a car-centric thoroughfare that we need to look at how we got there and how to avoid getting there in the future and what we can do about it, because it's like the worst example we have of a road that is built very much for cars and not for people. And that does a disservice to the residents, it does a disservice to the businesses. And I think we need to make sure that type of thing can't happen. So whatever in the code, let that happen, we should look at again. And one last thing, I've spoken to Jim about this. I've said that my personal goal is to be the most walkable city, at least in Fairfield County. And I know goals are aspirational, and that may be a big lift, but I still think we should shoot to be the best. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, no, I think that's these days when you're thinking about what preferences are, people's preferences throughout the country, it's not just the quality of life for the existing residents. It's really like an economic development strategy. If you can say that, with a straight face and have it where no one can even argue that you are the most walkable, bikeable city in the region, that's a huge selling point for all of you, and it also has a positive benefit on your quality of life. So Brad, looks like you're next.
Great, thank you. My name's Brad Craighead, and I'm here with my wife Tracy, and I'm speaking to you, or we're speaking to you as both property owners in the Norwalk Green neighborhood, and as also representative of the Norwalk Green Association. I guess my questions would really be focused on prioritization and how decisions are being made in terms of what projects are carried forward, how the decisioning comes about in terms of determining where crosswalks and where the sort of crisis areas are addressed. And, our focus, many of you are familiar with Norwalk Green area, and some of the points that I like to make to people are just the pure density of the area is pretty astounding. Just very quickly, there are over 1,000 full-time residents that live within 5 minutes walking distance of the green. As many of you know, I think there are 3, if not 4 churches and one of the city's synagogues right there, along with a number of other civic organizations. It's a very, very busy, dynamic area, which unfortunately, we have one of the city's, I guess, most iconic parks and neighborhoods and so forth. But unfortunately, it's really divided by East Avenue. And East Avenue, from just the pure speed of traffic, introduces an element of pedestrian safety that's really unfortunate. And you talk about connectivity, it basically eliminates the potential for people living in the area, particularly on the east side of East Avenue, to walk down and support Wall Street. If you ask me, it's a very easy fix. It's something that we talked about in the Bike Walk Commission last week. Just my ideas, but obviously looking for the experts to put forth a decision or a recommendation. But if you ask me, a few simple fixes as opposed to an elaborate traffic study could provide substantial connectivity and pedestrian safety for that area, which I think is very important to all Norwalkers. The other point that I would make that Tom really just made is, and perhaps it's already kind of baked in there already, but is when people go for a special permit for a project for a change of use, yes, there's a traffic study is a requirement, but I think to include some element of what's the impact on pedestrian safety? Are there measures that are being made or taken or envisaged to enhance pedestrian activity in the area? I think that's something that might be helpful going forward in terms of the zoning code. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate your support.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm not sure how, what the requirements are of the traffic impact studies, or what the measures of success, if you will, are. But in a place like Norwalk, where there is a strong desire, seems to be community-wide, for walkability and bikeability to be at the top of the list of priorities, then maybe there is some additional strength that could be added to cover those topics if it's not already. So we'll work with the city to learn more about what that requirements are, and see if there's some suggestions we can make about how to improve it. To your point, Brad, we went around the Village Green, the civic space itself, and it certainly is a lovely civic space, as long as you're standing facing a certain direction and have on noise canceling headphones. Because it's a great space, but that road is just so intimidating. It's so noisy. It happens a lot though, because the Village Greens tended to be in a location where multiple regional roads came together. And then as we started focusing more on cars, the departments of transportation and other state agencies said, you know what, this road is a little bit too, low key for the traffic that we want to carry here. And they weren't at that time thinking about, well, the Village Greens is the heart of this neighborhood or whatever. And what impact is that going to have? And so fortunately, there has been a big shift in the transportation engineering world regarding the idea of context. So we have the context sensitive thoroughfares strategy, so that when you're moving into a place like a village center or a downtown, or areas where you are trying to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists, the vehicles have a bit more friction, if you will, because the roads are narrow, you don't have as many lanes, and it's a little hard in the historic area because you often have a limitation on where you can have an additional connection. Sometimes connections are already there, but what we say is instead of increasing the number of lanes on any given road, you'd like to make parallel roads in the network, right? So you can have a multitude of ways to get around. So I think there are some specific planning things that you can do, even in a phased approach. So like the road that's on one side of the triangle park there, the green, have it be treated, in a way that makes it uber pedestrian and uber cycle friendly. And you kind of say, well, hopefully cooler heads will prevail in the future for the main thoroughfare, and it will get a road diet one day. But in the meantime, we can slow this side down and nearly make it feel like an attached green on that side of the street. And so there are some things. You may want to get a loud fountain to cover some of the traffic noise that's there. But nonetheless, it's a great point you've raised. So Scott has a hand up next.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Great, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Hey, so my question, well, first of all, thank you all for doing this. I always feel like I learn more about Norwalk just by, hearing everybody else's concerns. But where I live in East Norwalk, I guess I have a few balancing concerns that I would hope we consider. One of those is that, and I think you just hit on it, that there's a natural tendency to just want to widen a road to make it easier to get traffic through there, where there's congestion now. And, one concern I have about that is we already have such a low tree canopy here in Norwalk compared to the rest of the state. And as we're looking at widening roads, for example, Fitch, where Fitch Street hits East Avenue, there's a church there, St. Thomas the Apostle, and they have a 100-year-old oak tree there on the corner. And my understanding is that as part of the plans that are coming up to densify or increase the density here for the TOD, that tree has to make way for more road and or sidewalk, which, okay. So we lose one tree. It's not the end of the world, except for the people that are actually go to that church and appreciate that tree. I guess I just wanted to raise a voice and say I would hope we consider tree canopy as part of these increased connectivity issues. I think like Tanner was speaking earlier about what he experienced. Trying to walk down the hill to South Norwalk, not dissimilar. So I'm going to mute myself now because I got the dogs going nuts.
Yeah, the dogs are in favor of what you're saying for sure. I think that from our perspective, most of the places that we work around the country have tree save ordinances. You have requirements for saving a certain number of trees. You have to replace trees you cut down, et cetera, et cetera. It sounds like there may be one under consideration there in Norwalk to shore up some of that. But one of the things that I would suggest is in a place that has a real deficit of proper street trees, the yard trees, the trees on private property become really, really important because that is your only canopy at that point. And so thinking about ways that you can protect that canopy, ways that you can increase it over time. And, obviously we want to follow what, state law will allow. So we're, trying to look into and understand what state law allows you to regulate in this regard from a local zoning level. But it's very unusual that for us to come to a place where there doesn't seem to be very much protection of trees. And for whatever reason, you're very lucky that there are some areas that seem very protected and very, very heavily vegetated in the neighborhoods and things. But it could also not be the case, just depending on who owns a particular parcel. So we're looking into that as well. So Galen, is that how you say your name? Galen? Can you unmute and share your thoughts?
The only thing I was thinking is if you limit areas to park because you don't want to invite cars in and you want to encourage walkability, which I totally am for, don't forget people with limited mobility. There are people who need to be able to get close to areas to be able to enjoy them. And if there's very limited parking and you need to walk 4 blocks, 5 blocks to get to an area where you're going to go to a restaurant, to go to a store, people with mobility issues are frozen out of that opportunity altogether. So I think we have to keep in mind people with limited mobility. As the population ages, you'll have more people who are, on canes, or so it's just something for us to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And, as we talked about, the fact that, yes, it's great that people can walk longer than they can drive, but there are people, even at an earlier age, who aren't able to walk around and get around. So one thing that we will make sure of is that the new zoning regulation regarding parking, no matter what we decide, big picture, will meet all of the requirements for ADA and accessibility, et cetera, to accommodate for those needs as well. All right, Tanner, looks like you're back.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it short because I know that we're over time. I wanted to respond to a couple of points. I'll start with mobility. I completely agree that the driving is a solution that is necessary for people with limited mobility in some cases. The way I see it, the more cars that we can get off of the road that don't need to be driving, then the better the experience is for the people who do need to be driving. In terms of congestion and also in terms of parking, I would be very happy to see more accessible handicap type parking in close to our businesses for those people. Also, I wanted to mention just briefly the issue of Glover Avenue was brought up, and an anecdote was made about people taking, in an estimated number of trips. I think it was 7 trips per week in a car, and that might not include trips to the grocery store. Sadly, I think that critique is correct, but not because the grocery store is not close to Glover Avenue. I have multiple friends who have lived at 1 Glover, which is, I just measured it on Google Maps. It is a mere 1,200 feet from the front door of 1 Glover to the front door of Stop and Shop, but yet it is completely uninviting to walk. One of my friends that lived there, I asked him once, and he said he had never once walked to the grocery store, but he'd driven all the time. And to me, there are reasons for that that are obvious. 1 Glover has a huge parking garage in the bottom that I'm sure is at least in part due to parking minimums. Stop and Shop has a huge surface parking lot out front that is also in part due to parking minimums. I've never seen that lot full. And then also there's a huge highway in between the two, the Merritt Parkway. And if you were to walk from 1 Glover to Stop and Shop, you would have to cross no fewer than 4 different access ramps for the Merritt, none of which, last time I checked, had any crosswalks. I have walked that section before, and it is completely uninviting and I would not recommend it to anybody because it is frightening. Cars are going so fast there. So my point is that we could shift a lot of trips to away from cars if the environment was built for it. It's not a question of being too spread out because those two things are so close together. Even the new buildings that are at the north end of Glover Avenue, I measured those. They're 3/4 of a mile. That's a 15-minute walk for most of the demographic that lives there. People my age. Completely doable. Again, if it's attractive. Also, I wanted to address walkability and the different advantages, the different goals that it achieves. Tom Livingston brought up the idea of desirability and livability, which is completely true. Also, somebody from TPUDC brought up economic development. That is completely an economic development issue, but there are other issues that it addresses as well. Public health, right? The more that people can build walking or biking into their daily lives, the more that they will get the exercise that they need just as a matter of course. That's something that I found in my own life as I've tried to switch more trips to biking, that I feel much better because I'm actually getting exercise. I'm a software engineer by trade, and so I just sit at home in front of a computer all day. And switching my trips from a car to a bike has helped me to not be so sedentary. But that works at scale. When you can build a community where people walk more and bike more, then It's a public health win. And then economic equity. The cost of owning a car is high, and it is going up as the price of new cars goes up, especially during the pandemic, as the price has gone up even more. Also parking, when parking minimums require developers to build a ton of parking, they often pass that cost on to the people who live, especially renters, in those buildings. I've seen it estimated that the cost of building a single parking spot in a garage is on the order of tens of thousands of dollars. I've even seen figures as high as $60,000 as for the cost of building a parking spot. Obviously, it differs from city to city. But when you require developers to build that, then it requires them to pass that cost on to people, and it makes it much harder to build housing that's truly affordable. I want to talk about curb radii really quick. This was brought up to me by somebody who actually on Facebook responding to a post from our commission's Facebook page. I think that's something that zoning could address very directly. A couple examples, Washington and Main Street is, I think, the canonical example in the street. The curb radii are super long, and so people can really just fly around those turns. And there are crosswalks on all four sides, but the crosswalks are long because the curb radii are so long. Another one is Old Saugatuck and Gregory in East Norwalk. That's what somebody brought up on Facebook. And then the last thing that I'll mention is a pet issue of mine. As I've tried to switch more trips to cycling, I have been looking for a place to store my bicycles. I live in a little condo complex where I have 2 parking spots assigned to me. I wanted to put a small prefabricated shed in one of my parking spots to store bicycles, and it's been a year now that I've been working on this. It doesn't look like it'll be impossible to do under the current zoning code, but it has certainly not been easy. And I would love to see zoning code streamlined in such a way that it makes it easier for people to store their bicycles. Obviously, the solution I came up with is kind of a creative solution, not for everybody. But the fact that it's been so hard, even though I'm trying to do something that is good for public health and good for the environment, has been discouraging. I think that's all my comments. So thank you very much.
Great. Hey, Tanner, could you put a link in the chat to the prefabricated shed company that you're looking at?
It's just Home Depot, honestly. I was just going to pull a resin shed from Home Depot. I can put a link to it if you'd like, but it's nothing special.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious about as we think about character and those sorts of things. I've seen obviously some bike storage solutions that are, aesthetically unto themselves. They're like, oh, that's really kind of neat. And then I could, see that there might be some options that don't necessarily add to the overall aesthetic character of the streetscape. And so it's a fine line to, solve a problem that, makes it a better situation for the thing we're trying to prioritize, cycling, and then, what impact that may have. So that's why I was curious about it. So go ahead, Garrett.
Hi, I just wanted to add just a few more points. We've chatted a lot about parking, so I won't beat a dead horse, but I do want to make sure that we take a look at shared parking. I've only been here for a short period of time, but I just noticed that there's so much parking in the city, and we should just find ways to better utilize our existing parking. And there's several lots that just sit vacant throughout the day. So anything we can do to provide opportunities for the market or developers to better utilize existing parking so that we don't have to build new facilities. And then also, in the case of land development, how we can look at and encourage compatible uses that peak at different times to help lighten the burden. And then just add a little bit more to the parking when we do build new parking, how we can look at incorporating greener infrastructure, how we can incorporate landscaping to help add to the canopy coverage throughout the city. And we can look at green infrastructure and then how we position ourselves for the future. We know that we're moving to the electrification of vehicles. So how we can be a leading city in supplying the infrastructure within our parking facilities or our private developments to really encourage green infrastructure choices. And then the last point I just wanted to hit upon real quick is we've had a lot of great conversation, whether it's about different amenities adjacent to our sidewalks, whether it's street trees or lighting is so important. We haven't really touched upon that, but when trying to create an environment for people to feel comfortable walking, lighting during the evening plays a huge role. But we're limited. We have very little right away within the city, and to include all these features that they're so important. So how we provide opportunities to encourage developers or the market to create more space for sidewalks and these amenities and pedestrian zones along the street.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Frank, get your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, just an observation, not about this process, well, maybe two. I notice a lot of our streets throughout Norwalk are narrow, and that adds some character to the streets. But now with so many deliveries going on, like Amazon, and so many people using landscapers, I find that I'll be driving along and I'll be on a curve, and there'll be a landscape truck parked, and you can't see around the curve, and there's no requirements. It's probably not a zoning issue, but there's no requirements for flagging or marking or anything in terms of making the road safe for traffic. So you may just have to stop and wait, and then take your chances, kind of, especially if they're on a hill, a curve and a hill, where you've got to go over to the other side. Now you're not sure what's coming the other way. So that may be a traffic control issue, but it may be also a consideration for if people are going to have properties where they have large lawns, that they need a space for vehicle service vehicles on their property as well. Let's see, the other item is I see is that a lot of times bright bike paths, and I'm not sure what the legal requirement is, but again, the roads are narrow. Sometimes you'll see a bike path that's, I'll say 3 feet wide, and it narrows down to like 1 foot or less. And you kind of wonder what was the thinking. I guess the only thing I can think of is it's based on the center line of the road, but you certainly, it's really not a proper pathway for the bicycles to traverse.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would recommend to you all is, that you fight and protect in the most aggressive manner your narrow roads. You wouldn't believe how many cities we work in around the country where they're spending millions and millions of dollars to retrofit streets to make them narrow again, where they had widened them to solve some perceived problem at the moment. And now they see that they were either overbuilt in the first place, meeting the current regulations of that community, or were widened to accommodate traffic. And now their circumstances and preferences have changed that make them have to go back and fix it. So you were lucky in that you have a lot of really narrow streets still. So work hard to keep those for sure. So I see Steve's hand up.
Yes, before I get in trouble, I just wanted to mention that Louis Schulman, who chairs the zoning commission, is joined us for the whole time, and I forgot to mention that at the beginning. Galen Wells, who spoke earlier, is also on zoning commission. And I want to just say thank you to Tom Livingston and Lisa Shanahan from Common Council for joining us, and thank everybody else for taking some time during the middle of the day on a Monday.
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you for everyone's participation. I think we're over on time, which is great. That means there's lots to talk about. The next meeting is this evening at 6 o'clock. What are we talking about?
Character and development at 6 p.m. today.
Yes, so please come back if you can. If you can't, then you're able to go online and watch the recording of that. Please tell people that this is happening throughout this week. Invite people to join you. Make a party out of it. Tell them you're going to get on for some tailgating pre-game before the meetings. Just don't have too many drinks so you're too rowdy when we get on. But hope this becomes a fun process for you all because it's so important.